There is a peninsula at the southern edge of Europe. It hangs beneath the Greek mainland, like a hand reaching into the sea. Most travelers never set foot on it. They land in Athens. They board a ferry to the islands. They chase the white villages and blue domes that fill every photograph ever taken of Greece. And they fly straight over the place where almost everything they think they know about ancient Greece actually happened. Sparta is here. Mycenae is here. Olympia is here. The palace of a king from Homer's Odyssey still stands here, 3,000 years after he was said to have ruled from it. Yet you can drive these mountain roads for an hour without passing another car. You can walk into a ruined Byzantine city and find yourself completely alone in it. The Greeks who lived here believed something else about this land. They believed the underworld had doorways, physical entrances, where the living could cross over to the dead. 2 of them are on this peninsula. One is a cave at the southernmost tip of the Greek mainland. The other is a river so sacred that the gods swore their oaths upon it, falling down a gorge 200 meters deep. That river still flows, and almost nobody goes to see it. This is the Peloponnese, a hand of stone, holding everything Greece used to be. There is only one way to drive onto the Peloponnese, and it takes about 10 seconds. You cross a bridge. Below you, the ground simply opens. A vertical slot has been cut through solid rock, more than 70 meters deep and barely 25 meters wide at the waterline. Sheer limestone walls, striped with sediment, dropping straight down to a strip of green water. This is the Corinth Canal, 6 kilometers long, slicing clean through the neck of land that once joined this peninsula to the rest of Greece. Ships still use it. From above they look like models, threading a gap so narrow that on the larger vessels there is only a couple of meters of daylight on either side. And the idea behind it is 2,500 years old. The tyrant Periander conceived a canal here around 600 before Christ. He gave up. Instead, ships were dragged overland on a paved trackway, hauled bodily across the isthmus rather than sailing 200 extra miles around the peninsula. Then Rome tried. The Emperor Nero began digging in 66 after Christ, working from plans drawn up under Julius Caesar and Caligula. He is said to have broken the first ground himself with a golden pickaxe. He died before it was finished. Herodes Atticus took up the effort later and abandoned it too. The canal was finally opened in 1893, roughly 2,500 years after somebody first thought of it, and within decades it was too narrow for the ships being built. Stand on the bridge and you are looking at the exact place where the Peloponnese stops being part of the mainland. The Greeks called this strip the isthmus, from their word for neck. Everything south of here funneled through it. Armies, traders, pilgrims. Which is why, 4 miles away, there is a mountain with a fortress on it. Acrocorinth rises alone out of the plain, and it is thought to be the largest and highest acropolis in ancient Greece. 3 kilometers of walls, 3 successive lines of fortification, each with its own gateway, climbing the rock in sequence. Almost every power that ever wanted this peninsula held this hill. Greeks, Romans, Byzantines, Franks, Venetians, Ottomans, each rebuilt the walls, so that in places it is genuinely difficult to tell which century you are touching. Inside the highest enclosure there is a Byzantine cistern, a Frankish tower, a Venetian chapel, an Ottoman mosque with its minaret, and the ruins of a temple of Aphrodite, layer upon layer, on one summit. From up there, the view runs across the gulf to the mountains of central Greece. And south, into the peninsula itself, toward a plain where, 1,000 years before Corinth was a city, someone built walls that the Greeks themselves could not explain. Come down off the isthmus, and the land opens into the Argolid. This is one of the most fertile plains on the peninsula, ringed by low mountains, running down to a wide blue gulf. Orange groves, cypress, heat. There is a sanctuary on the eastern side of it that people traveled across the Greek world to reach. Epidaurus was a healing center, sacred to Asclepius, the god of medicine. The sick came here and slept in a special hall, hoping the god would appear in a dream and tell them what was wrong. Alongside the sanctuary, the Greeks cut a theater into the hillside. It seats around 14,000 people, in more than 50 rows of stone. It is among the best preserved ancient theaters anywhere, and its reputation rests on one thing: stand at the center of the orchestra and drop a coin, tear a sheet of paper, speak without raising your voice. They hear it in the back row. Acoustic researchers have studied the effect for decades. The current explanation focuses on the limestone seating itself, which appears to filter out low-frequency background noise while letting the higher frequencies of the human voice carry. Whether the builders understood the physics or simply refined the design across generations by trial and error is still an open question. Either way, it has outlasted the civilization that built it. Performances are still staged here in summer. Audiences still fill those stone rows to watch plays that were already old when the theater was new. A few kilometers north, on the same coast, something else survives. Not above ground. In the Bay of Agios Vlasios, the water is shallow and extraordinarily clear. Swim out about 45 meters, and the seabed changes. Walls appear, foundations, paved sections, enormous storage jars, still lying where they were left. Archaeologists identify this as a grand Roman country estate, built in the 2nd century after Christ, above the harbour of ancient Epidaurus. Then the ground moved. This is a seismically restless corner of the world, and over the centuries the coastline subsided. It lies barely 2 meters down. Nobody knew it was there until 1971, when someone photographed the bay from a hot air balloon and saw the outline of buildings through the water. Fish drift through doorways now. Sunlight moves across floors that have not felt a footstep in 1800 years. "25 kilometers west, the plain meets the sea at a town that most people call the most beautiful in Greece. Nafplio is stacked on a rocky headland above a bay, so still it holds the sky. Streets paved in marble, balconies of wrought iron, bougainvillea over pale Venetian stone. 3 castles guard it. The first sits alone on a tiny island in the harbour mouth, the Bourtsi, built by the Venetians, with a chain that could be drawn from the island to the shore to seal the port against any hostile ship. The second, Acrocorinth, runs along the ridge above the old town. It is the oldest of the 3, with foundations reaching back into antiquity. And above everything, on a hill 200 meters up, stands Peloponnese. The Venetians raised it in just 3 years, between 1711 and 1714, 8 linked bastions, each designed to keep fighting after the others had fallen. A stone staircase climbs the hillside to reach it. Local tradition counts 999 steps. Nobody agrees on the real number. Everybody agrees on the view. From the top, the whole Argolid lays itself out. The bay, the mountains behind, the red roofs of the old town so far below they look like something built for a model railway. This town will matter again at the end of this story. 2,000 years from now, in the telling, it becomes the first capital of a country that does not exist yet. But that is a long way ahead. Because the oldest thing in this plain is inland, on a low hill between 2 peaks. And when classical Greeks stood in front of it, 1,000 years after it was abandoned, they refused to believe that human beings had built it. The road climbs from the plain toward a saddle between 2 hills. Olive trees, dry grass, cicadas in the heat. Then the walls appear. They rise out of the hillside in blocks that belong to a different scale of world. Some weigh several tons, fitted together without mortar, without any of the neat geometry that Greek architecture would later perfect. This is Mycenae, and it is roughly 1,000 years older than the Parthenon. That gap is the thing to hold on to. When Athenians of the 5th century before Christ walked up to these walls, the builders were as distant from them as the first Crusades are from us. The civilization that raised Mycenae had already collapsed, been buried and passed into legend. So the Greeks reached for an explanation. The blocks were too large for men. They credited the Cyclopes, the one-eyed giants of myth. Archaeologists still call this style Cyclopean masonry. At the main entrance stands the Lion Gate, two great beasts carved above the doorway, flanking a central column, their heads long since lost. It has stood here for more than 3,000 years. Walk through it, and you enter the citadel of a warrior kingdom. The Mycenaeans dominated the Aegean world by roughly the 14th century before Christ. They were traders, they were raiders, they were builders of fortresses. They were also, crucially, Greek. Clay tablets found at Mycenaean sites, written in a script called Linear B, were deciphered in the 20th century, and the language turned out to be an early form of Greek. Greek civilization did not begin with Homer. It began here, centuries before him. Then came Heinrich Schliemann, a German businessman turned excavator, convinced that Homer described real places and real people. He dug at Troy. Then, in 1876, he came here. Digging inside these walls, he uncovered a circle of shaft graves, bodies buried with extraordinary wealth, weapons, jewelry, and 5 funeral masks of beaten gold. Schliemann telegraphed the king of Greece. He believed he had found the tomb of Agamemnon himself, the king who led the Greek fleet to Troy. He had not. Modern dating places, those graves around 1600 to 1500 years before Christ, that is 3 to 4 centuries before the traditional date of the Trojan War. The man behind the mask was not Agamemnon. He was an anonymous warlord who died before Homer's heroes were ever imagined. But the name stuck, and the mask remains one of the most arresting things ever pulled from Greek soil. Below the citadel stands another kind of monument, a vast beehive tomb cut into the hillside, approached by a passage 36 meters long, its doorway crowned by a single stone lintel, weighing around 120 tons. Inside, the chamber opens into a dome of stacked stone. Each ring of blocks steps slightly inward over the one below until they close at the top. No mortar, no supporting frame. Nothing larger would be built anywhere on Earth for well over 1,000 years, until the engineers of Rome learned to work in concrete. It remains the largest corbelled dome ever constructed. It is called the Treasury of Atreus. It held no treasure. It held the dead. Then, around 1200 before Christ, it ended. Across the eastern Mediterranean, palace civilizations collapsed within a few generations. Cities burned, trade failed, the tablets stop. The cause is still genuinely unresolved. Earthquake, drought, invasion, internal revolt. Scholars still argue, and it was probably several of these at once. What followed is sometimes called the Greek Dark Age. Writing disappeared from Greece for roughly 4 centuries. The great citadels stood empty on their hills. But the memory did not die. It went into song. Generations of poets carried the stories through the silence until they hardened into the Iliad and the Odyssey. So when Homer sings of golden Mycenae, he is not inventing. He is remembering a real place, dimly, across 400 years of darkness. The gate still stands. The plain below still fills with heat and cicadas, exactly as it did when the palace above was full of scribes counting jars of oil. Mycenae built walls so heavy that a later civilization credited them to giants. It built a tomb that held the world record for 1,000 years, and it was forgotten so completely that its own descendants thought it was a story. Further south, one city did the opposite. It built almost nothing at all. No great temple, no monumental walls, no theater carved into a hillside. Its name is the most famous in the ancient world, and a Greek historian, writing while its power was still absolute, predicted exactly what travelers would find when they came looking for it. He was right. Drive south from Tripoli, and the road drops into a long green valley. Olive groves, orange trees, the river Eurotas running through the middle of it. This is the Valley of Sparta. The modern town sits in the middle of it, laid out in the 19th century on a neat grid. There is a main street, there are cafes, there is a statue of a warrior, and of the ancient city there is almost nothing. Visitors who come here expecting the ruins of the most feared military power in Greek history are frequently, quietly, disappointed. There is a theater, much of it robbed for stone. There are scattered foundations on a low hill. There is a sanctuary of Artemis, where Spartan boys were once ritually whipped. That is close to all of it. But the absence is not an accident of time. It is the most revealing thing about them. Sparta did not build monumental walls because its citizens argued that a city should be defended by men rather than masonry. It did not build a great temple to rival Olympia. It did not lay out grand civic architecture. For most of its history, it was not really a city at all. In the way Athens was a city, it was 5 villages that had agreed to act as one. And a Greek historian noticed, Thucydides, writing during the war between Athens and Sparta, made an observation that has become one of the most quoted passages in ancient literature. He suggested that if Sparta were ever deserted, and only its foundations remained, future generations would find it very hard to believe that its power had ever matched its reputation. Athens, by contrast, would look twice as powerful as it really was, because of the scale of what it had built. He was writing roughly 2,500 years ago, and he was exactly right. Sparta's reputation was never carried by its architecture. It was carried by the system that produced its soldiers, boys taken from home at 7, a lifetime of communal training, a society organized almost entirely around producing men who would not break in a battle line. That system depended on something the tourist brochures rarely mention. The Spartans could live as full-time soldiers because an enslaved population worked the land for them. They were called helots, and they vastly outnumbered their masters. Sparta was therefore a state permanently braced against its own people. The military machine and the fear that fed it were the same thing. Sparta built nothing and trusted that its name would be enough. It was wrong. Beyond the mountains, the people it had enslaved were about to make the opposite bet. They would build 9 kilometers of stone, and they would build it for one reason: so that they could never be erased again. Cross the range westward, and the land changes completely. The dry valley of Sparta gives way to something softer, rolling hills, deep green, olive groves running to the horizon. This is Messenia, and it is the most fertile country in the southern Peloponnese, which is exactly why Sparta took it. Sometime in the 8th century before Christ, the Spartans crossed the mountains and conquered this land. They did not simply raid it, they did not simply tax it, they kept it. The Messenians rebelled. More than once. Each time the rebellion was crushed. Some fled overseas and built new lives in Italy, in Sicily, in Libya. Those who stayed lived under a system designed to break them. But something remarkable happened in those 300 years. They did not forget who they were. Across generations of enslavement, the Messenians held on to their identity, their heroes, their history, their claim to this land. They passed it down, and they waited. Then, in the year 371 before Christ, a Theban general named Epaminondas met the Spartan army in a field at Leuctra, in central Greece, and he destroyed it. The myth of Spartan invincibility died on that afternoon. Epaminondas understood something about his enemy that others had missed. Sparta's power did not rest on courage alone. It rested on Messenia, on the fields, and the people forced to work them. So instead of marching on Sparta, he marched here. 2 years after Leuctra, in 369 before Christ, he freed the Messenians and helped them build a city. They called back their scattered people. Messengers went to Italy, to Sicily, to Libya, to every place the exiles had settled. Come home, there is a city now. And they came. What they built stands today on the western slopes of Mount Ithome, near a village called Mavromathi. It is called Ancient Messene, and it may be the most underrated archaeological site in Greece. Start with the walls. Roughly 9 kilometers of fortification once ringed this city, broken only where the mountain itself served as the defense. Much of it still stands. At the northern end you reach the Arcadian Gate, a great circular courtyard of stone, with an outer entrance and an inner one, designed so that any attacker who forced the first door would find himself trapped in a stone ring with defenders above him on every side. The threshold still carries the ruts worn by ancient cart wheels. You can put your hand in them. Inside the walls, the city unfolds with extraordinary completeness. A stadium ringed with stone seating, a theatre, a great open agora, a sanctuary of Asclepius that served as the civic heart of the city, rather than a hospital. And here is what makes Messene different from almost everywhere else in Greece. Nothing was built on top of it. Athens has a modern city over it. Sparta has a modern town over it. This place was abandoned, and the fields simply closed over the stones. What archaeologists have uncovered is a complete Greek city, laid out on a grid, largely as its builders left it. The traveler Pausanias came here in the 2nd century after Christ and described it in detail. Modern excavation has been matching his account to the ground for over a century, and a museum on the site now holds more than 12,000 finds. Yet on most days you can walk the agora nearly alone. There is a particular feeling in this place that is hard to shake. Every other great Greek city was built by people at the height of their power. This city was built by people who had just come out of 300 years of slavery. They knew exactly what they were building it for. Not glory, not empire. Insurance. 9 kilometers of stone, so that it could never happen again. North of here, beside a slow river, the Greeks built the opposite idea, a place with no walls at all, designed to let everyone in, even the men who were trying to kill each other. The valley of Olympia is quiet in a way that feels almost deliberate. Pine trees, the Alpheus River running slow and shallow, fallen columns lying in the grass exactly where an earthquake dropped them. There was never a town here. Olympia was not a city. It was a sanctuary, and for most of the year it stood nearly empty. Then, every 4 years, the Greek world arrived. The games are traditionally dated to 776 before Christ. They ran for almost 12 centuries, until a Roman emperor abolished them in the 4th century after Christ. And they were never really a sporting event. They were a religious festival, held in honor of Zeus, and the athletics were an act of worship. Before each games, heralds went out from this valley in every direction. They traveled to every Greek city, and they announced the ekacheria. The word means roughly the laying down of arms, the sacred truce. This is where a popular idea needs correcting. It is often said that all of Greece stopped fighting during the Olympics. That is not quite what happened. The Greeks did not end their wars. What the truce actually did was make the territory of Olympia sacrosanct and guarantee safe passage. No one could interfere with a traveler heading to or from the games, no matter whose land he crossed. Which is arguably more impressive. These were city-states in near-permanent conflict, and they collectively agreed that for a few weeks, an athlete from an enemy city walking through your territory was untouchable. At the center of the sanctuary stood the Temple of Zeus. Inside it stood one of the 7 wonders of the ancient world. The statue was made by Phidias, the greatest sculptor of the age, around 12 meters high, a wooden core overlaid with ivory for the skin and gold for the robes. It is gone, but his workshop is not. Just outside the sacred enclosure stands a building whose interior dimensions match the inner chamber of the temple almost exactly. Phidias built the statue here, at full scale, so it would fit when it was moved. Excavators found sculptors' tools inside, ivory fragments, materials for working glass, and a simple drinking cup with an inscription scratched into it. The inscription says, "I belong to Phidias." 2,500 years later, in a workshop in a quiet valley, we have the man's cup, with his name on it. Olympia was where the Greek world came to agree on something, once every 4 years. For a few weeks the wars paused, and a shared idea held. But this valley is downstream of something much older. Long before the first race was run here, a different Greek world stood on the coast to the south, and it had already collapsed. There is a hill above the Bay of Navarino, 6 kilometers inland, with clear views up and down the coast. Olive trees grow across it. For centuries nobody thought it was anything at all. In the 1920s, a landowner noticed old stone blocks near the summit. In April 1939, an American archaeologist named Carl Blagan began to dig. He worked with one arm. He had lost the other in a hunting accident as a boy. On the first day he found clay tablets, hundreds of them, covered in a script nobody could read. They were Linear B, and they were the first ever found on the Greek mainland. The palace had burned sometime around 1180 before Christ. The fire that destroyed it baked the wet clay tablets hard. By destroying the building, it preserved its paperwork. So what do these documents say? They are inventories, rations, offerings, lists of workers, of bronze, of perfumed oil. From them, researchers have reconstructed a kingdom. The palace on this hill administered a territory covering roughly all of modern Messenia, supporting a population estimated in the tens of thousands. It was ruled by a figure the tablets call the Onax, the Lord. Homer had a name for the king of Pylos. He called him Nestor, the oldest and wisest of the Greek leaders at Troy, who according to the Iliad sent 90 ships to the war, second only to Agamemnon himself. This site has been known as the Palace of Nestor ever since. Whether a man called Nestor ever lived here is unknowable. The palace as excavated was built shortly after 1300 before Christ, which places it firmly in the Mycenaean world Homer was remembering. What survives is remarkable. This is the best preserved Mycenaean palace anywhere in Greece. The walls stand roughly a meter high across the whole complex, so the floor plan reads like an architectural drawing laid out on the ground. You walk in past the 2 small rooms where the archive was found, through a courtyard, into the Great Hall. At its center is a circular hearth 4 meters across, ringed by 4 column bases. The walls were painted with lions, with griffins, and with a bard playing a lyre. In a side room lies a clay tub. Guides call it Nestor's bathtub. It is a wonderful story. Some archaeologists now question whether the object was a bath at all, given its size. Enjoy the moment, but hold it lightly. Then, in 2015, a team working just outside the palace opened an undisturbed shaft grave. Inside lay a man in his early 30s, buried around 1500 before Christ. Around him were more than 1500 objects, gold rings, bronze weapons, ivory. An ivory plaque in the grave carried an image of a griffin. The man has been known ever since as the Griffin Warrior. Drive down from the hill and the landscape delivers one more thing. The coast here holds a lagoon, protected as a wetland, where flamingos and herons feed in the shallows. Behind it rise sand dunes, and behind those, the sea has carved a bay into an almost perfect semicircle. It is called Voidokilia. From above, it forms the shape of the Greek letter omega. Above the beach, in the cliff, there is a cave. Local tradition ties it to Nestor's cattle and to Hermes. Higher still stand the ruins of a Frankish castle from the 13th century. So in a single view you have a Bronze Age harbour, a mythological cave, a medieval fortress, and a protected lagoon. And in the bay just south, on a morning in 1827, a combined British, French and Russian fleet destroyed the Ottoman and Egyptian navy at anchor. The Battle of Navarino effectively secured Greek independence. "3,000 years of history, stacked in one bay, and a beach so photogenic that most of the people lying on it have no idea what happened here," which raises a question worth stopping on. Everything in this journey so far has been something people made. Walls, tombs, temples, harbors, archives baked hard by the fire that destroyed them. But the crowd on that sand is not there for the archive, they are there for the water. And the Peloponnese, it turns out, is quietly one of the finest landscapes in the Mediterranean. Almost nobody comes here for that. Everything so far has been about what people built here. Set that aside for a while, because the Peloponnese has another life entirely, and most of it involves water. Start about 30 kilometers from Kalamata, on the road toward Pylos. Near the village of Haravi there is a sign, a rough track, and a car park at the top of a slope. You hear it before you see it. The path drops into a gorge through dense green, over small wooden bridges, under plane trees, and then the water appears, and it is the wrong color for Greece. Not blue. Turquoise, shading to emerald, so clear that the rocks on the bottom look closer than they are. This is Polylimnio. The name means many lakes, and there are around 15 of them, strung along a stream in a chain of pools and waterfalls, each with its own local name. The tallest of the falls drops roughly 25 meters into a pool at its base. The full walk is about 3 kilometers. Some of it is a scramble, with iron handholds bolted into the rock at the difficult sections. People swim here. The water is cold, in the way that spring water always is, and the gorge holds the shade for most of the day. A warning worth taking seriously. These gorges flood, and rock falls after rain. People have been killed here. Do not go into a Greek gorge on a wet day, however good the photographs look. North of Polylimnio, the river Nida cuts its own valley, 31 kilometers of water running down from Mount Lycaon, forming the border between Messenia and Elis, with waterfalls, stone bridges, and old watermills scattered along it. Then the land reaches the sea, and the Peloponnese does something it does better than almost anywhere in the Mediterranean. Voidochelia has already appeared in this story, below the palace of Nestor. It deserves a second look on its own terms, a near-perfect semicircle of pale sand, backed by dunes, with the Yalova lagoon behind it, and no development at all. No umbrellas, no beach bars, nothing built. And then there is the island. Peloponnese sits off the southern tip of Laconia, a 10-minute ferry crossing from the mainland. It was joined to the Peloponnese once. An earthquake separated it. On its southern shore is Chelmos. Two bays, joined by a narrow spit of white sand, backed by dunes and juniper. The water is pale turquoise and shallow, a long way out, and photographs of it are routinely mistaken for the Caribbean. It is a protected area within the European Natura network. In July and August it is busy. In June or late September it is close to empty. The Mycenae has a different kind of coast entirely. Around Cardamili and Stupa the beaches turn to white pebble and deep clear water beneath cliffs, and at Calagria, cold freshwater springs bubble up through the seabed so that swimmers feel sudden cool currents threading through the warm sea. So the peninsula offers, within a few hours' drive, a mountain waterfall you can swim under, a lagoon full of flamingos, and an island with sand like the tropics. Almost none of it appears in a guidebook chapter about ancient Greece. All of it is here. And the strangest water on the peninsula is still ahead. Not a pool or a bay, but something the Greeks believed no living thing could drink. To find it, you have to go up. There is a region in the center of this peninsula that most people have heard of without knowing it is a real place. Arcadia. The word has been used for 400 years to mean something specific: a pastoral paradise, shepherds and flutes, a green world untouched by ambition or war. Painters painted it, poets wrote it, European aristocrats built gardens trying to imitate it, and almost none of them ever came here. The real Arcadia is the mountainous heart of the Peloponnese, rugged, forested, difficult country. Its ancient inhabitants had a reputation among other Greeks for being tough, rural, and somewhat backward. The transformation happened in Rome. The poet Virgil, writing his eclogues in the 1st century before Christ, took this obscure Greek highland and reimagined it. He filled it with cool springs and soft meadows, with shepherds singing love songs, untouched by the violence of the wider world. He was inventing something, and it worked so completely that the invention outlived the reality by 2,000 years. Later, a Latin phrase attached itself to the idea, and it appears carved on a tomb in one of the most famous paintings in the Louvre. It in Arcadia ego. Even in Arcadia, I am here. The speaker is death. Even in paradise, the shepherds find a grave. So Arcadia became a double idea: perfect beauty and the knowledge that it ends, and the actual place is still here. The road climbs from Tripoli into stone villages set on wooded slopes. Dimitsana, spread across a double hilltop 900 meters up, its mansions and bell towers looking down into a gorge. Stemnitsa, a little to the south, built almost entirely of grey stone, historically a village of silversmiths. Between them runs the Lucios. It is a short river, only around 23 kilometers. It cuts a gorge with red limestone walls rising 100 meters above the water. Pausanias claimed it was the coldest river in the world, and said the infant Zeus was washed in it. Then there are the monasteries. They are not built beside the gorge, they are built into it. The monastery of St. John the Baptist hangs on a vertical cliff face, its wooden balconies and cells cut directly into the rock, appearing almost suspended above the drop. Across the gorge stands Philosophou, set beneath a tall cliff 200 meters above the riverbed. Hermits came here first, living in the caves. Over centuries the caves became communities, and because the gorge was almost impossible to reach, those communities survived when almost everything else was overrun. During Ottoman rule, these places became refuges. They hid people, they preserved manuscripts, and during the War of Independence they sheltered fighters. There is a walking route along the gorge floor, connecting Dimitsana and Stemnitsa. It takes most of a day. It passes both monasteries, the ruins of ancient Gorties, and old watermills, and for long stretches you will meet nobody at all. These mountains hold one more thing, and almost nobody goes to see it. Drive southwest from the gorge, past Andritsena, and the road climbs until the trees thin and the villages stop. At 1130 meters it ends at a temple standing entirely alone. No town, no ruins of a town, nothing but stone, sky and wind. This is the temple of Apollo Epicurus at Bassae, Apollo the Helper. According to Pausanias, the people of nearby Phigalia built it in gratitude after the god delivered them from a plague, and he credited its design to Iktinos, the architect of the Parthenon. Whoever designed it was experimenting. Greek architects generally chose one order. This building uses all three: Doric outside, Ionic within, and in the inner chamber, standing alone, a single Corinthian column. That column is the earliest surviving Corinthian capital known anywhere, the order that would spread across the Roman Empire, and from there into the banks and parliaments of the modern world, makes its first appearance on an Arcadian mountaintop, in a building almost nobody visited. The isolation that made it pointless is what preserved it. It was effectively forgotten for close to 1700 years. In 1986 it became the first monument in all of Greece inscribed on the UNESCO World Heritage List. Before the Acropolis, before Delphi, before Olympia, and on most days the car park is empty. Virgil imagined a green valley where shepherds lived outside history. The real Arcadia turned out to be a place where monks, rebels, and one extraordinary temple hid from history for centuries. In Arcadia, the water gave life. Pausanias said the infant Zeus was washed in the Lucius, and the monks who came later drank from the same river for 800 years. Follow those mountains north, and the water changes its meaning entirely. There is a stream up there that the Greeks believed no living thing could drink, a river that bound the gods themselves and killed anyone who touched it. The northern Peloponnese is a different country from the south. Here the mountains are higher, wetter and greener, fir forests, alpine lakes, snow through the winter, and a ski resort above the town of Calavrita. The whole region is now protected as a national park and a UNESCO Global Geopark, and its geology is genuinely ancient. The limestone of these mountains began as sediment on a seafloor around 485 million years ago in the Ordovician period. It was lifted into mountains much later as the African plate ground north into Eurasia. The peaks now approach 2,400 meters. They are made entirely of an ocean that no longer exists. Water has been working on that limestone ever since. Near the village of Castria lies the Cave of the Lakes, a cave system running close to 2 kilometers into the rock, with chambers rising 85 meters, containing a sequence of terraced underground lakes. On the lower level, excavators found human and animal remains, including hippopotamus fossils. To the north, the Vorahikos River has carved a gorge through the mountains toward the Gulf of Corinth, and in the 1890s, engineers did something extraordinary with it. They built a railway through it. The Othondotos is a rack railway, 22 kilometers long, running from the coastal town of Diakopto up to Calavrita. It uses a toothed central rail to grip the gradients. It threads through tunnels, over stone bridges, and along ledges cut directly into the gorge wall, with the river running below. It has been operating for well over a century. The journey takes a little over an hour, and for much of it the train is close enough to the rock that passengers instinctively lean away from the windows. But the reason to come to these mountains is higher up, and much stranger. On the northern slopes of Mount Chelmos, a stream rises at around 2,100 meters. It runs through forest, and then it reaches the edge of a cliff. It falls more than 200 meters down a sheer face of limestone. It is the second highest waterfall in Greece. Locals call it the Mavroniri, the Black Water. The ancient Greeks called it the Styx. In myth, the Styx was the boundary of the underworld, but it was also something more specific. It was the oath. When the gods swore, they swore by the water of the Styx, and that oath could not be broken, not even by Zeus. The ancients also believed the water was lethally poisonous. They claimed it was so corrosive that no vessel could hold it, except a horse's hoof. And when Alexander the Great died suddenly in Babylon, in 323 before Christ, rumors spread almost immediately that he had been poisoned with water taken from this waterfall. Ancient historians recorded the suspicion. Getting there means driving to the high slopes and then descending on foot, roughly 90 minutes down. Every step has to be climbed back. What waits at the bottom is a narrow valley, a black stained cliff, and a thin ribbon of water falling out of the sky. There are no barriers, there is no visitor center, there is a cave beside the falls where people have written their names. The Styx was the oath that even gods could not break, a thing that was supposed to last forever, falling quietly down a cliff that nobody visits. "600 kilometers of history later, on a hillside above Sparta, something else that was supposed to last forever came to an end. It had stood for 11 centuries, it had survived the fall of Rome itself, and it finished here, on a slope of grey stone, on a spring morning, without a single blow being struck. From the valley floor it looks like a mistake. A steep conical hill juts out from the flank of Taygetos, and covering it, from the plain almost to the summit, are the remains of a city. Churches, mansions, streets, a palace, all of it stacked on a slope so severe that the roofs of one level sit at the feet of the next. This is Mystra, and it exists because of a broken promise in the 13th century. After the Fourth Crusade shattered the Byzantine Empire, Western knights carved up Greece. A Frankish prince built a castle on this hill in the 1240s to control the Spartan plain. He held it for less than 20 years. Captured in battle by the Byzantines, he bought his freedom by surrendering his castles. Mystra was one of them. And what the Byzantines did with it was not what anyone expected. People began moving up the hill from the exposed plain below, where they were vulnerable. The settlement grew downward from the fortress. Churches were built, then monasteries, then mansions, then a palace. By the middle of the 14th century, Mystra was the capital of the despotate of the Morea, ruling most of this peninsula, and as Constantinople weakened, this provincial mountain town became something remarkable. It became the intellectual center of the dying empire. The most important figure was a philosopher named Gemistos Plethon, who taught here from around 1410 until his death. He championed Plato at a time when Western Europe had largely lost him. He argued for the Hellenic character of Byzantine identity. He proposed radical political reform. His students carried his ideas west. One of them, Bessarion, became a cardinal in the Roman Church. When Byzantine scholars traveled to Italy for the Council of Florence, they brought this thinking with them. It is not an exaggeration to say that some of the intellectual current feeding the Italian Renaissance ran through this hillside. Meanwhile, the churches were being painted. The frescoes of Mystra represent the final flowering of Byzantine art, and many of them survive. Faces, gold, deep blue, still on the walls after 6 centuries. Then, in 1449, a coronation took place here. Constantine XI Palaiologos was crowned in Mystra before traveling to Constantinople to take the throne. He was the last Roman emperor. There would never be another. 4 years later, in 1453, Constantinople fell. Constantine died fighting on its walls, and his body was never identified. Mystra outlived the empire by 7 years. On the 30th of May, 1460, the last despot surrendered the city to the Ottomans without a fight. So the Byzantine Empire, which had endured for more than 1,000 years after Rome fell in the west, effectively ended twice, once on the walls of Constantinople, and once here, quietly, on a hillside above Sparta. The city stayed inhabited for centuries afterward, under Ottoman and then Venetian rule. People only left in the 19th century, moving down to modern Sparta. What they left behind is the reason to come. Walking Mystra takes hours, and it is all vertical. You climb through the lower town, past the cathedral where the coronation happened, up through monasteries and empty mansions, to the palace complex, and finally to the Frankish castle at the summit. From up there the whole valley opens out, the Eurotas River, the olive groves, and on the plain below, the low scattered ruins of ancient Sparta. Two civilizations, separated by 2,000 years, in a single view, one of them famous for producing soldiers, the other for producing philosophers, and for keeping Plato alive long enough to hand him back to Europe. Mystra is a UNESCO World Heritage Site, and it deserves the recognition. It also remains, by the standards of Greek tourism, remarkably quiet. The empire ended on this hill, but the peninsula did not go dark. Along the coasts, another power was already building. Merchants from a city of canals, who did not want the land at all. They wanted the harbours, and the sea rode east. And on the eastern shore, they found a rock. Drive south along the eastern coast of Laconia, and at first you see nothing unusual. Dry hills, scrub, the road bending toward the sea. Then the land ends, and something enormous is standing in the water. It is a slab of rock, roughly 300 meters high, sheared off from the mainland and rising almost vertically out of the Myrtuan Sea. From the coast road it appears completely bare. Grey stone, nothing on it, nothing to see. A single causeway runs out to it. This is Monemvasia, and the name is a set of instructions. It comes from two Greek words, Monemvasia, single entrance. There is one way in. That is the entire point. The town was founded in 583 after Christ by mainland Greeks fleeing the Slavic and Avar invasions. They needed somewhere that could not be taken, and they found a rock connected to the world by a strip of land narrow enough for a handful of men to hold. Walk the causeway and follow the wall to a gate. It is small, and it turns sharply so that nothing can charge through it. And then you step out the other side, and the illusion collapses. Because the town is not on top of the rock, it is on the far side of it, facing the open sea, completely invisible from the mainland. Stone houses, vaulted alleys, bougainvillea over doorways. churches with tiled domes, cobbled lanes so narrow that in places you can touch the walls on both sides at once. All of it stacked on the slope between the cliff above and the water below. For 1400 years this town has been here, and you cannot see any of it until you are inside. What it became was not a hideout, it became rich. From the 10th century onward, Monemvasia grew into one of the most important trading ports in the Byzantine world. It controlled sea lanes between the Aegean and the Adriatic. It was prosperous enough to mint its own coinage. Western Europeans knew it by the Italian form of its name, Malvasia. And that name attached itself to a wine, Malmsey, sweet and strong, shipped from this rock across medieval Europe. It reached England. It turns up in Shakespeare, a wine known across a continent, named after a rock in Laconia that most Europeans could not have placed on a map. The town also had a second reputation. It was, for long periods, one of the more dangerous pirate bases in the Levant. Then the empires came for it in sequence: Byzantine, Frankish, Venetian, Ottoman, and back again. Each left something behind. The walls of the lower town are largely Venetian, built on Byzantine foundations. There is a mosque, there is a hammam. When Constantinople fell in 1453, Monemvasia held out. It resisted Sultan Mehmed II in 1458, and again in 1460. For a brief period, it was the last territory left to the despot of the Morea, who had no army to defend it, and who eventually handed it to the Pope. Above the lower town, a steep path climbs to the upper town. Almost nobody lives up there now. In the 17th century, travelers counted around 500 houses. At the cliff edge stands the church of Hagia Sophia, 12th century, Byzantine, with an octagonal dome, standing directly above a sheer drop to the sea. Monemvasia was not the only fortress on this coast. Far to the west, the Venetians held Methone and Coroni, two castles guarding the sea route around the southern Peloponnese toward the eastern Mediterranean. Methone still runs out into the water on a low spit, a curtain of stone with a small octagonal tower standing alone in the sea beyond it. Coroni sits above a whitewashed village that looks more like an island town than the mainland. Directly across the Laconian Gulf, another people faced the same centuries of invasion and chose the exact opposite answer. They did not hide anything. They built upward, on open ridgelines, in full view, and they dared the world to come and try. The Mani begins where the road narrows and the green runs out. The mountains come down to the sea here, and the land turns to bare grey rock, prickly pear, stone walls dividing fields that hold almost no soil, olive trees that look like they have been fighting for 200 years, and then, on the ridgelines, the towers. They are unmistakable, tall, narrow, square stone structures, 3 or 4 stories high, with tiny windows near the top. From a distance, a Maniote village looks like a chess set left out in the sun, They are not castles, they are houses, and they were built for fighting the neighbors. The reason lies in the ground itself. There is very little arable land in the deep Mani, and what exists is precious. Families competed for it, clans formed, and disputes over land, water and honor hardened into a system of blood feud that could run for generations. The towers were the architecture of that system. Height was advantage. If your tower was taller, you could fire down into your rival's home. So families built upward, in competition, and the rules were strict about it. Feuds could last years. Whole families confined themselves inside their towers for months, while the fighting continued. Truces were negotiated for the harvest, then hostilities resumed. The Mani was effectively never conquered. Its terrain was too poor to be worth the cost, and its people too dangerous to be worth the trouble. Under Ottoman rule, it remained semi-autonomous, governed by a local chieftain who held the title of Bey. The Maniots have long claimed descent from the ancient Spartans. It is a powerful story, and it is deeply held here. Historians treat it with considerable caution, and it should be presented as identity rather than established fact. But something in it rings true regardless. A hard, proud mountain people who refused outside rule for centuries, living beneath the same mountain range that once shielded Sparta. The most striking village of all is Vathia. It stands on a hilltop in the deep south, an entire settlement of towers packed together, most of them roofless now. It is largely abandoned. It photographs like something dreamed rather than built. Further north, the feeling changes completely. Areopoli is the capital of the Mani, a town of grey stone streets and tower houses named after Ares, the god of war. Below it, on a tiny harbour, sits Limene, where the water is an almost artificial blue and old tower houses stand directly above the sea. And on the western coast, at the gentler northern end, lies Cardamili, stone houses, olive groves, and behind them the full wall of Taygetus rising toward its highest summit. Cardamili has been called one of the most beautiful villages in Europe. It also appears in the Iliad, listed among the 7 cities Agamemnon offered to Achilles to persuade him to return to the fighting. So the Mani ends where Homer began. When the feuds finally stopped, in the 19th century, something unexpected happened. Without the vendetta, and with almost no farmland, there was little to hold people here. They left. Emigration hollowed out the peninsula, and the towers were abandoned to the wind. Follow the road to the end of their peninsula, and it stops. Past the last village, past the last tower, the land narrows to bare rock and runs out into the sea. There is an opening down there in the stone. Near the village of Pyrgos Diru, on the western shore of the Mani, there is an opening in the rock at the edge of the sea. Inside it, a river runs underground. This is the cave of Licada, part of the Diros system. The explored passages extend for close to 15 kilometers, and much of the cave lies below the water table. Visitors go in by boat. The journey takes around half an hour. The water is still and so clear that the boundary between air and water becomes difficult to locate. Stalactites hang to the surface and continue below it. The temperature holds steady around 16 to 18 degrees all year. The guides row. There is very little sound. It is one of the strangest half hours available anywhere in Greece. But the more significant cave is next door, and it is not open to tourists. It is called Alipotrepa. The name means foxhole. It was found by accident in the 1950s when a dog chased a fox into a hole in the ground. What was inside was a Neolithic world. Several researchers have suggested that this cave may be part of what generated the Greek idea of the underworld, a vast dark chamber beneath the earth, an underground lake, hundreds of burials, a cave that swallowed the dead and then closed. That connection is a hypothesis, not a settled fact. But stand at the mouth of these caves and it becomes very easy to understand. Because a short drive further south, the ancient Greeks marked exactly this coast as a doorway. The road continues down the Mycenae until the villages stop. Then the tarmac ends, and a footpath runs out along a spine of rock toward the last point of land. This is Cape Tainaron, also called Cape Matapan, the southernmost point of the Greek mainland and of the entire Balkan Peninsula. There is a lighthouse at the tip, built in the 19th century. There are the remains of a sanctuary of Poseidon on the headland, a site of worship particularly associated with the Spartans. There is a small chapel, built over the older sacred ground, and a Roman mosaic floor lying open to the sky. And there is a cave. The Greeks believed that this was one of the entrances to the underworld, the place where the dead crossed over and where the ferryman waited. It is the cave through which Heracles was said to have descended for his final labor, to bring back Cerberus, the three-headed dog that guarded the gates of Hades. It is where Orpheus was said to have gone down to bring back Eurydice. The cave itself is small and disappointing to most visitors, which is oddly appropriate. The doorway to the underworld should probably not look impressive. What is overwhelming is the place around it. No trees, no shelter, bare rock and wind, and the sea meeting at the end of the land in three directions at once. The Greeks who chose this spot as the edge of the world were not being poetic. They were being literal. Standing there, with the mainland behind you and nothing but water ahead, the conclusion feels less like mythology and more like observation. For centuries, this cape was avoided by sailors. The Mycenae coast was a pirate haven, and the waters here are notoriously difficult. Today, a footpath brings you out to the lighthouse in around 40 minutes. The keepers are long gone. The light is automatic. And the strangest thing about the gate of the underworld is how ordinary the afternoon feels when you get there. Sun on stone, a boat somewhere out on the water, the wind. The ancient world ended here, but the modern one began not far away, a few hours north along this same rocky coast. In a town of grey towers, on a March morning, the Mani decided it had had enough. There is one more thing this peninsula did, and it happened comparatively recently. For nearly 4 centuries, the Peloponnese was Ottoman territory, known to the wider world as the Morea. Its castles held garrisons, its administration answered to Constantinople. But the language survived, the church survived, and in the mountains, particularly in the Mani, so did a tradition of men who had never really been governed. Most Greeks learned that the War of Independence began on the 25th of March, 1821, when a bishop raised the revolutionary banner at the monastery of Agia Lavra, near Calavrita. There is a famous painting of the scene. It is the national day. Historians now regard that specific event as a later invention. The painting was made in 1865, decades afterward. The fighting had already started, and it started here, in the south, among the towers. On the 17th of March, the chieftains of the Mani gathered at Ariapoli under Petros Mavromichalis, the last bey, and declared war. 2,000 Maniots moved north, joined by Theodoros Kolokotronis, and on the 23rd of March the Ottoman garrison at Kalamata surrendered. It was the first significant town in Greece to be freed. Calavrita fell 2 days later. The war that followed was long and brutal. Ibrahim Pasha of Egypt landed with a modern army in 1825 and came close to crushing the rebellion entirely. Then, in October 1827, a combined British, French and Russian fleet destroyed the Ottoman and Egyptian navy in the Bay of Navarino. The same bay, below the palace of Nestor, where this journey stood on a beach shaped like the letter Omega. When the new state was formed, its first capital was Nafplio, beneath the 3 castles. Its first governor, Ioannis Kapodistrias, was shot at the door of a small church there in 1831. The bullet that missed is still lodged in the wall, under a pane of glass, and people walk past it every day without knowing what they are looking at. So modern Greece began on this peninsula, roughly 200 kilometers from where Mycenae began. And that is the thing about this place. It does not resolve into one story. It never has. It is a Bronze Age gate with lions above it, and a Roman house lying under 2 meters of clear water. It is a temple standing alone on a mountain almost nobody climbs, and a rock in the sea with a whole town hidden on the far side of it. It is a philosopher teaching Plato on a hillside above Sparta, 4 years before the empire ended. It is 15 turquoise pools in a gorge outside Kalamata. It is a black waterfall that the gods swore by. Everything here was built by people who could see the mountains and knew what they meant. That help was far away, that the next valley was another world, that whatever you built, you would probably have to hold it yourself. They built accordingly. Towers in the Mani, a city on a cliff at Mystras, a town with a single entrance. And then, eventually, they left. The citadels emptied, the despot surrendered, the towers were abandoned, the sea closed over the villa. What remains is a peninsula holding more of the ancient world than almost anywhere on Earth, and a coastline most people never think to look for, and a fraction of the visitors either deserves. At the very bottom, past the last village, the path still runs out to the cape. The lighthouse stands where the Greeks believed the world ended, and the cave is still there in the rock below. They thought the dead crossed over at that spot. They were wrong about the mechanism, and entirely right about the feeling. Because standing at Tainaron, with the wind coming off the water, it is genuinely difficult to believe that anything continues past this point. The land stops. The sea takes over. And behind you, stretching north for 200 kilometers, is the hand of stone that held Mycenae and Sparta and Olympia and Messenia and Mystras, still mostly empty, still mostly quiet, still waiting for people to notice.